The November wind cut through Clara Bennett's thin coat as she stood at the iron gates of the DeLuca estate, her fingers trembling around the worn leather handle of her suitcase. The morning sky over the Hamptons was a slate gray, heavy with the promise of rain, and the massive mansion before her seemed to rise from the landscape like something out of a Gothic novel, all sharp angles, dark stone, and windows that reflected nothing but clouds. She checked her phone one more time. The address was correct. This was it. Clara took a deep breath, the cold air burning her lungs, and pressed the buzzer on the security panel. A camera above the gate swiveled toward her, its red light blinking like a watchful eye. For a moment she considered turning around, walking back down the long private road to the main highway, catching a bus back to Boston, back to her cramped studio apartment and her evening shifts at the diner. But then she thought of her brother Michael and the stack of medical bills on her kitchen counter, and she pressed the buzzer again. Yes? A woman's voice crackled through the speaker, sharp and impatient. I'm Clara Bennett. I'm here for the caregiver position. I have an appointment at 9. There was a pause, the sound of paper shuffling. You're early. I'm sorry, The gate buzzed and began to swing open with a mechanical groan. Clara swallowed hard and walked through, her worn sneakers crunching on the perfectly maintained gravel driveway. The path curved through manicured gardens, bare trees standing like sentinels on either side, their branches reaching toward the heavy sky. Everything about this place whispered money, old money, the kind that built empires and buried secrets. The front door opened before she could knock. A woman in her 60s stood in the doorway, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, her black dress perfectly pressed. Her eyes swept over Clara with the efficiency of someone accustomed to judging people in seconds. Mrs. Romano, the woman said, not offering her hand. I manage the household. You're the 5th candidate this month. Clara's heart sank. The 5th? Signora DeLuca is particular. Mrs. Romano stepped aside, allowing Clara into a grand foyer that took her breath away. Marble floors gleamed under an enormous crystal chandelier, and a sweeping staircase curved upward to the 2nd floor. Everything was pristine, cold, beautiful in the way museums are beautiful, meant to be admired, not touched. Leave your suitcase here. If you're hired, someone will take it to the staff quarters. Mrs. Romano's heels clicked against the marble as she walked, and Clara hurried to keep up, very aware of how out of place she looked in her thrift store coat and scuffed shoes. They passed through a series of rooms, each more intimidating than the last. A dining room with a table that could seat 20, a library with walls of leather-bound books, a sitting room with furniture that looked like it belonged in a palace. Clara caught glimpses of staff members, a man polishing silver in what must have been the butler's pantry, a young woman arranging flowers in a crystal vase, but no one made eye contact. The position is straightforward, Mrs. Romano said without looking back. Signora DeLuca requires constant companionship. She's 78, in good physical health, but she's deaf. She uses sign language, though most of the previous caregivers simply wrote notes to communicate. The pay is generous because the family values discretion above all else. You see nothing, you hear nothing. You speak to no one about this family or this house. Is that understood? Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Romano stopped so abruptly that Clara nearly walked into her. They were standing outside a set of French doors that led to what appeared to be a sunroom. Through the glass, Clara could see an elderly woman sitting in a wheelchair, her silver hair catching the muted light filtering through the windows. She was staring out at the gray ocean in the distance, her profile elegant and sad. She hasn't spoken, signed to anyone in 3 days. Mrs. Romano said quietly, and for the first time something like concern crossed her face. Her son thinks a companion might help, but I warn you, Miss Bennett, this family is complicated. If you're looking for a simple job, this isn't it. Before Clara could respond, Mrs. Romano opened the doors. The sunroom was warm, filled with plants that seemed impossibly green against the gray day outside. The elderly woman didn't turn at the sound of the doors opening. She continued to stare out at the ocean, her hands folded in her lap, her back straight despite her age. Signora, this is Clara Bennett, the new candidate for the companion position. No response. The woman didn't move, didn't acknowledge their presence. Mrs. Romano's jaw tightened. As you can see, she's... Clara stepped forward, her heart pounding. She moved slowly into the woman's line of sight, then raised her hands and began to sign. Good morning, Signora DeLuca. My name is Clara. It's an honor to meet you. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The elderly woman's head snapped toward Clara. Her dark eyes, so similar to eyes Clara would come to know well, widening in shock. Her hands flew up almost involuntarily. You sign? Yes, ma'am. I've been signing since I was 8 years old. Behind her, Clara heard Mrs. Romano's sharp intake of breath, but she kept her focus on Signora De Luca, whose face had transformed. The sadness was still there, but now it was joined by something else. Hope, curiosity, and the beginning of a smile. No one here signs. The elderly woman's hands moved quickly, her signs precise and elegant. They write to me like I'm a child. They shout as if volume could make me hear. You're the first person in 6 months who has spoken to me in my own language. Then I'm sorry it took so long for us to meet, Clara signed back, and she meant it. She recognized the loneliness in this woman's eyes. It was the same loneliness she'd seen in her brother's face before he'd found his community, before he'd realized that being deaf wasn't a limitation, but simply a different way of experiencing the world. Signora De Luca reached out and took Clara's hands, squeezing them gently. Her eyes were wet. What's your name again? Clara Bennett. Clara, the woman signed slowly, as if savoring the name, like the light. Do you know that's what it means? Clear, bright. I didn't know that. It's beautiful. Will you sit with me, Clara? Will you tell me about yourself? I'll leave you to it, Mrs. Romano said stiffly, though her expression had softened slightly. I'll send for tea. As the housekeeper left, Clara pulled a chair close to Signora De Luca's wheelchair and settled in. The elderly woman's face was animated now, her hands moving with an energy that seemed to erase years from her appearance. How did you learn to sign? She asked. My younger brother Michael was born deaf, Clara signed, her movements smooth and natural. When I was 8 and he was 5, our parents enrolled us in ASL classes together. Michael didn't want to be alone in his silence, and I didn't want him to be alone either, so we learned together. He taught me that deaf doesn't mean broken, it just means different. Your brother is lucky to have you. I'm lucky to have him, Clara corrected gently. He's in college now, studying computer science. He's brilliant, much smarter than me. I doubt that, Signora De Luca signed with a small smile. Tell me, Clara, who is like the light? Why are you here? Why does a young woman with your gift want to spend her days with an old woman in a cage of a mansion? Clara hesitated. She could lie, could give some professional answer about wanting to help people, about the joy of caregiving. But there was something about this woman's directness, her unflinching gaze, that demanded honesty. My brother's college tuition, she signed simply, and medical expenses. He had surgery last year, cochlear implant. He chose not to use it, but the bills still came. Our parents died when we were young. It's just us. I work 3 jobs, but it's not enough. When I saw the salary for this position, I couldn't say no. The elderly woman nodded slowly, and there was no judgment in her expression, only understanding. Honesty. I like that. Everyone in this house lies, Clara. They lie with their mouths, with their eyes, with their silence. But you tell the truth. That's rare. That's precious. Before Clara could respond, she felt it, the weight of being watched. She turned and saw him standing in the doorway. Lorenzo De Luca was exactly what she'd expected, and nothing like she'd imagined. He was tall, perhaps 6'2", with dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from marble, all sharp cheekbones and a strong jaw. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit, no tie, the top button of his white shirt undone, but it was his eyes that struck her most. Dark, intense, and completely unreadable. They swept over her with the same assessing quality as Mrs. Romano's had, but there was something else there too, something dangerous. He didn't enter the room. He simply stood in the doorway, his hands in his pockets, watching the scene before him with an expression that might have been surprise or might have been suspicion. Clara couldn't tell. Signora De Luca noticed her son, and her face changed, still warm, but with an underlying tension that hadn't been there before. She signed to Clara, my son Lorenzo. He worries too much. He thinks I need a babysitter. Then she waved at him, gesturing for him to come in. Lorenzo moved with a predator's grace, each step measured and deliberate. He stopped a few feet from his mother's wheelchair and bent down to kiss her cheek. His eyes never left Clara. Mama, he said, his voice deep and carefully controlled, though Clara noticed he didn't sign. I see you've met Miss Bennett. Signora De Luca signed rapidly to Clara. He doesn't sign. He never learned. Tell him what I say. Clara stood, suddenly very aware of her cheap clothes and the fact that her hair was probably a mess from the wind. She cleared her throat. Your mother says, she began, But Lorenzo cut her off. I know what she said. I may not sign, but I've learned to read her hands well enough over the years. He turned his attention fully to Clara, and she felt pinned by that gaze. Mrs. Romano tells me you can sign. Where did you learn? My brother is deaf. We learned together as children. Convenient. The word was loaded with implication. Clara felt her cheeks flush. I'm sorry? That you happen to have exactly the skill set my mother needs. That you appeared at exactly the right time. Convenient. Lorenzo. Mrs. Romano appeared in the doorway, her face tight with disapproval. Miss Bennett came through the agency with impeccable references. There's nothing convenient about it except good fortune. But Lorenzo didn't look convinced. He circled Clara slowly like a shark circling prey, and she fought the urge to take a step back. Tell me, Miss Bennett, what do you know about my family? Nothing, Clara said honestly. The agency said you valued privacy. They gave me your mother's care requirements and the address, that's all. You didn't Google me? Look up the DeLuca name? I don't have internet at my apartment right now. I'm behind on bills. It was embarrassing to admit, but it was true. And something in her honesty must have registered because Lorenzo's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Not softer exactly, but less hostile. Signora DeLuca tapped the arm of her wheelchair impatiently, and when she had their attention, she signed forcefully. Stop interrogating the girl like she's a criminal. She's kind, she speaks my language. That's all I care about. The rest is your paranoia, my son. Clara translated automatically, and she caught the briefest flicker of something in Lorenzo's eyes. Hurt, maybe, or guilt. But it was gone so quickly she might have imagined it. Fine, Lorenzo said. You're hired. 2-week trial period. Mrs. Romano will show you to your room and explain the household rules. You'll start immediately. My mother takes her medications at noon, dinner is at 7, and she retires at 9. Any questions? Just one, Clara said, surprising herself with her boldness. Does your mother get any say in this, or are you making all the decisions for her? The room went silent. Mrs. Romano looked horrified. Even Signora DeLuca looked surprised. But Lorenzo's expression was the most interesting. For just a moment, that marble mask cracked and she saw something like respect flash across his face. My mother can't speak for herself, he said quietly. She can sign for herself, and I can speak for her if she wants me to. But ultimately, it should be her choice whether I stay or go. Lorenzo looked at his mother. Signora DeLuca was smiling, actually smiling, and her hands moved quickly. I want her to stay, and I like her. She has spine. This house could use more spine and less fear. Clara translated, and Lorenzo's jaw tightened. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he nodded once, sharp and decisive. Welcome to the family, Miss Bennett. Don't make me regret this. He turned and walked out, his footsteps echoing on the marble floors. Mrs. Romano let out a breath. Well, she said, that went better than I expected. Come, I'll show you to your quarters. And Miss Bennett, a word of advice. Be careful. This family has rules and breaking them has consequences. As Clara followed Mrs. Romano out of the sunroom, she glanced back one last time. Signora DeLuca was watching her, and she signed one more thing. Thank you, Clara like the light. You've given an old woman hope. Don't let my son scare you. His bark is worse than his bite. Usually. Clara smiled and signed back. I'll remember that. But as she walked through the cold, beautiful house, past rooms full of expensive things and empty of warmth, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just stepped into something far more complicated than a simple caregiving job. Lorenzo's words echoed in her mind. Don't make me regret this. She had a feeling that regret was going to be the least of anyone's worries. Boston. 8 years earlier, the hospital waiting room smelled like disinfectant and bad coffee. 12-year-old Clara sat on a plastic chair, her legs swinging because her feet didn't quite reach the floor, watching her little brother Michael through the glass window of the examination room. He was 9, small for his age, and he looked terrified. Their grandmother, the only family they had left after the car accident that took their parents, sat beside her, clutching a tissue. They said the hearing aids might help, she whispered. They said there's a chance. But Clara watched Michael's face as the audiologist fitted the devices into his ears, watched him flinch at sounds he'd never heard before, watched him start to cry, and she knew. She knew that her brother didn't need to be fixed. He needed to be understood. That night she'd gone to the library and checked out every book on American Sign Language she could find. If the world wouldn't learn Michael's language, then she would. She would be his voice when he needed one, and his silence when he didn't. She would never let him be alone. Present day, the DeLuca estate. Clara woke to the sound of rain drumming against her bedroom window. It took her a moment to remember where she was. Not in her cramped Boston studio with its leaking ceiling and sirens at all hours, but in a room larger than her entire apartment, with thick carpets and heavy curtains, and a bed so soft she'd barely slept, afraid she'd sink into it and never surface. The staff quarters were in the east wing of the mansion, Mrs. Romano had explained, away from the family's private rooms. Clara's room was simply furnished but elegant. A double bed with crisp white linens, a dresser, a small desk by the window, and her own bathroom with marble counters and towels so fluffy they felt like clouds. It was the nicest place she'd ever lived, and it made her profoundly uncomfortable. Her phone showed 6:47 a.m. She had 13 minutes before she was expected in the kitchen for breakfast. Mrs. Romano had been very clear about the schedule. Clara dressed quickly in the simple black pants and white blouse that Mrs. Romano had provided, standard uniform for household staff, and pulled her dark hair into a neat ponytail. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the young woman staring back. She looked professional, respectable, like someone who belonged in a place like this. Like a liar, her reflection seemed to say. The hallways were quiet as she made her way to the kitchen, her footsteps muffled by expensive rugs. She passed other staff members, a middle-aged man carrying fresh linens, a young woman pushing a cleaning cart, but no one made eye contact. No one spoke. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was oppressive, like everyone was afraid their voices might summon something they didn't want to face. The kitchen was enormous, all stainless steel and granite counters, with a wall of windows looking out over the gray morning ocean. Mrs. Romano was already there, along with an older man in a chef's uniform who was preparing what looked like enough food to feed a small army. "Miss Bennett," Mrs. Romano said with a nod. "This is Antonio, the chef. Antonio, this is Miss Clara Bennett, Signora DeLuca's new companion." Antonio looked up from the vegetables he was chopping and gave her a warm smile, the first genuine smile she'd seen in this house besides Signora DeLuca's. "Ah, the one who signs. Signora Maria hasn't stopped talking about you. Well, signing about you, you know what I mean." His accent was Italian, thick and musical. "It's nice to meet you," Clara said. "Signora takes her breakfast at 8, Mrs. Romano continued, ignoring Antonio's friendliness. "Usually in the sunroom, toast, soft-boiled eggs, fruit, and herbal tea. She's particular about the tea temperature. Not too hot. She doesn't like to wait for it to cool. You'll bring it to her on a tray and assist her as needed. After breakfast, she likes to sit in the garden if the weather permits. Though today, she glanced at the rain-streaked windows. She'll probably want to stay in the library. She reads. Well, she looks at books. She enjoys the photographs in art books. Does she have friends? People who visit?" Mrs. Romano's expression tightened. "No. Mr. DeLuca prefers privacy. But surely she must want to see people, talk to people. She's been so isolated." "Miss Bennett," Mrs. Romano's voice was sharp. "The rules of this household exist for good reasons. You're here to provide companionship within these walls, nothing more. No visitors, no outings, no contact with the outside world, unless explicitly approved by Mr. DeLuca. Is that understood?" Clara felt a flash of anger but swallowed it down. "Understood. Good. Take the tray. And Miss Bennett, Signora Maria is fond of you already. Don't break her heart." The words felt like a warning and a plea all at once. Signora DeLuca was already in the sunroom when Clara arrived, sitting in her wheelchair by the windows despite the rain. She wore an elegant navy dress, her silver hair perfectly styled, and Clara wondered if she'd done it herself or if there was someone who came to help her, some invisible servant she hadn't yet met in this house of ghosts. When the elderly woman saw Clara, her face lit up. "Good morning," Clara liked the light. "I was afraid yesterday was a dream." "Good morning, Signora," Clara signed back, setting the tray on a nearby table. "Very real. Very much here. Please, call me Maria. Signora makes me feel ancient." The old woman's eyes sparkled with humor. "Well, more ancient. You're not ancient. You're elegant. There's a difference." Maria laughed, a silent laugh that shook her shoulders, her hand covering her mouth in delight. "I knew I liked you. Sit, sit. Tell me how you slept. Is your room comfortable? Are they treating you well?" As Clara prepared Maria's breakfast, arranging everything just so, she signed with her free hand, an awkward dance that made Maria laugh again. "Your brother taught you to multitask, didn't he?" He taught me a lot of things. Patience, creativity, how to argue in ASL, which is surprisingly beautiful. I miss arguing, Maria signed wistfully. Everyone here agrees with me because I'm old and Lorenzo's mother. No one challenges me. No one debates. It's like being dead but still breathing. Clara paused in the middle of buttering toast. That's a terrible way to live. Yes, it is. Maria's hands moved slowly now, weighted with sadness. My husband, Antonio. Yes, the chef is named after him. He was Antonio's godfather. He used to argue with me about everything. Politics, art, how to raise Lorenzo. We would sign so fast our hands would blur, and then we would laugh and make love and start arguing all over again. She smiled at the memory. He died 6 years ago. Heart attack. Sudden. One day he was here, the next. Silence. Real silence. Not the kind I'm used to. I'm so sorry, Clara signed. And she meant it. She could see the grief in every line of Maria's face. Lorenzo doesn't talk about his father. He became hard after that. Cold. He was always serious, even as a boy, but after Antonio died, Maria's hands trembled slightly. He built walls, and now I can't reach him. My own son, and I can't reach him. Before Clara could respond, she felt that sensation again, the weight of being watched. She turned and saw Lorenzo standing in the doorway, dressed in running clothes, his dark hair damp with rain and sweat. He must have been out running despite the weather. His eyes were fixed on Clara with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Good morning," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "I trust my mother slept well?" Maria had turned at the movement and now she signed rapidly. "Tell my son that I would sleep better if he didn't prowl around the house like a ghost. Tell him he looks terrible. Tell him he works too much." Clara hesitated, but Maria's expression was firm, so she translated, word for word, watching Lorenzo's jaw tighten. "Tell my mother that I'm fine," he said. "He says he's fine," Clara signed. "He's lying," Maria signed back. "He always lies about being fine." She says, "I know what she said." Lorenzo moved into the room and Clara noticed he kept his distance from both of them, as if proximity might burn him. "I have a meeting in the city this afternoon. I'll be back for dinner. Mrs. Romano has her instructions if Mother needs anything." "Don't go," Maria signed suddenly, her movements sharp and urgent. "Stay. Have breakfast with us, with me." "When was the last time we had breakfast together?" Clara translated, and something flickered across Lorenzo's face. Guilt, pain, longing. But then the mask slammed back down. "I can't. The meeting is important. Everything is always important. Except me." "Mama," his voice cracked just slightly. "That's not fair." "Fair? You want to talk about fair?" Maria's hands were flying now, her emotions raw and uncensored. "You lock me in this house like I'm made of glass. You hire strangers to care for me because you can't bear to do it yourself. You look at me with your father's eyes and I know you blame me." "Stop." Lorenzo's voice was hard now, commanding. "Miss Bennett doesn't need to be in the middle of this." But Clara was already signing Maria's words because she'd been hired to be Maria's voice, and she wouldn't betray that trust no matter how uncomfortable it made her. "You blame me for not hearing the signs, for not knowing something was wrong with your father's heart? As if my deafness made me blind too." The room went silent. Rain lashed against the windows. Lorenzo stood frozen, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, and Clara could see the war happening behind his eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't blame you, Mama. I blame myself, for not being here. For being too busy with the business to notice he was struggling. For—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "For surviving when he didn't." Maria's face crumpled. She reached out toward her son, and for a moment, Clara thought Lorenzo would go to her, would cross that distance and let his mother hold him. But he didn't. He stood there, drowning in guilt, and Clara's heart broke for both of them. "Lorenzo," Maria signed, tears streaming down her face. "My beautiful boy. It wasn't your fault. It wasn't anyone's fault. It was just life. Cruel, unfair life," Clara translated, her own voice thick with emotion. And maybe it was wrong. Maybe she was overstepping, but she couldn't watch this anymore. She walked to Lorenzo and took his hand. His skin was cold from the rain, and gently pulled him toward his mother. "She needs you," Clara said softly, "and I think you need her too." For a heartbeat, Lorenzo resisted. Then something in him broke open, and he crossed the room in 3 strides and dropped to his knees beside his mother's wheelchair. Maria pulled him into her arms, and he buried his face against her shoulder like a child seeking comfort after a nightmare. Clara turned away to give them privacy, moving to the windows and pretending to be fascinated by the rain-soaked garden while behind her, a son and mother held each other and mourned together for the first time in 6 years. She didn't know how long they stayed like that. 5 minutes. 10. When she finally heard movement and turned back, Lorenzo was standing, his face carefully composed again, but his eyes red-rimmed. Maria was smiling through her tears, one hand pressed against her son's cheek. Lorenzo looked at Clara, and there was something different in his gaze now. Not warmth, exactly, but not hostility either. Recognition, maybe. Respect. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for translating accurately. It's my job." "No, your job is to keep my mother comfortable. What you just did," he shook his head, "that was something else." Maria was signing again. "I like her, Lorenzo. She's good for this house. Good for me. Maybe good for you too." Lorenzo's expression shuddered immediately. "I don't need—" "Everyone needs someone," Maria interrupted. "Even you. Especially you." "I'll be back for dinner," Lorenzo said, ignoring his mother's words. But as he left, he glanced back at Clara one more time, and she saw something in that look that made her pulse quicken. Curiosity, interest, danger. When he was gone, Maria sighed and reached for Clara's hand. "My son is complicated, difficult, but he's not bad, just lost. His father was his compass, and when Antonio died, Lorenzo lost his way." "What kind of business is your family in?" Clara asked, because she'd been wondering since she arrived, since Mrs. Romano's warnings about discretion, since the security cameras and the locked gates and the way staff members spoke in whispers. Maria's expression became guarded. "Import and export," she signed vaguely. "Antonio built the business from nothing. Lorenzo inherited it when he was too young before he was ready. The weight of it, it's crushing him. I see it every day." It wasn't a real answer, but Clara let it go. She'd been in this house for less than 24 hours. Some secrets took time to surface. The days developed a rhythm. Clara would wake at dawn, breakfast with Maria in the sunroom. Then they'd spend the morning together, sometimes in the library, where Clara would read aloud, while Maria watched her lips and followed along in the book. Sometimes in the garden on clear days, walking slowly along paths lined with roses that were dying in the November cold. Sometimes just sitting in comfortable silence, Maria knitting while Clara caught up on emails from Michael on her phone. Her brother had sent her a message that first night. "How's the rich people house? Are you wearing a fancy uniform? Have you met any hot millionaires?" Clara had laughed and written back, "The house is intimidating. The uniform is basically restaurant clothes. The millionaire is complicated, I'll tell you more later. How are classes?" "Same. Professor Martinez is still obsessed with quantum computing. I'm still pretending to understand. Miss you. Don't let them rich people brainwash you. Never. Love you. Love you more, loser." In the afternoons, Maria would nap, and Clara would have 2 hours to herself. She usually spent them in her room, researching online what she could find about the DeLuca family. The results were sparse and unhelpful. A few society page photos of Lorenzo at charity events, always in a tuxedo, always with a beautiful woman on his arm, never smiling. An obituary for Antonio DeLuca Sr., describing him as a prominent businessman and philanthropist. Nothing about the business itself, no company name, no details. It was as if the family existed in the gaps between public knowledge, in the spaces where questions went unanswered. She'd see Lorenzo in passing, in the hallway, at dinner when he actually joined them, once in the kitchen late at night when she'd gone down for water and found him sitting in the dark, drinking whiskey and staring at nothing. They'd exchanged nods, nothing more, but Clara had felt the weight of his loneliness like a physical thing. On the 5th day, everything changed. Clara was in the library with Maria, reading from a biography of Frida Kahlo. Maria loved artists, their passion and pain. When the door burst open and a man strode in, he was younger than Lorenzo, maybe late 20s, with slicked back hair and a suit that cost more than Clara's entire wardrobe. His eyes swept over her with an expression that made her skin crawl. "So you're the new babysitter," he said, his smile all teeth and no warmth. "Lorenzo didn't mention you were so pretty." Maria's hands moved sharply. "That's Nico, Lorenzo's cousin. Don't trust him." "I'm Clara Bennett," Clara said, standing. "I'm Signora DeLuca's companion." "Companion? Right." Nico moved closer, invading her space deliberately. "You know, I could use a companion myself. Gets lonely in this big house." "I'm working." "All work and no play, Clara. Can I call you Clara?" He reached out as if to touch her hair, and Clara stepped back quickly, putting Maria's wheelchair between them. "You should leave," she said firmly. "We're in the middle of something." "Oh, I bet you are." Nico laughed, but there was an edge to it. "Does Lorenzo know you're mouthy? He usually prefers his staff more submissive." The door opened again and Lorenzo filled the doorway. His expression was thunderous. "Nico, my office now. We were just talking, cousin. Getting to know the new hire. Now." Nico held up his hands in mock surrender. "Whatever you say, boss." He winked at Clara as he passed. "We'll continue this later." Lorenzo's eyes followed his cousin out of the room, then shifted to Clara. "Did he touch you?" "No, he tried. I moved." "Good." He turned to leave, then paused. "If he bothers you again, tell me immediately. Nico doesn't understand boundaries." "Why do you keep him around if he's like that?" It was a bold question, probably too bold, but Clara was tired of tiptoeing around the mysteries of this house. Lorenzo studied her for a long moment. "Family obligations," he said finally. "Sometimes we're stuck with the family we have, not the family we want." Then he was gone, and Clara was left wondering what exactly that meant. Maria was signing frantically. "Nico is dangerous. Stay away from him. Promise me, Clara." "I promise," Clara signed back. "But why is he dangerous? What does he do?" Maria's hand stilled. Some questions are better left unasked in this house. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Nico's smile, about Lorenzo's warning, about Maria's fear. At midnight, she gave up on rest and went down to the kitchen for tea. The hallway was dark, lit only by occasional sconces casting pools of yellow light. She was padding quietly in her slippers and pajamas when she heard voices, angry voices coming from somewhere nearby. She knew she should keep walking, should respect the privacy Mrs. Romano had insisted upon, but something made her stop. "Can't keep doing this, Lorenzo. The business is changing. We need to adapt." That was Nico. "We adapt by going legitimate, by diversifying, not by expanding operations." Lorenzo's voice was hard, controlled. "Legitimate? You want to walk away from everything your father built?" "My father is dead and I'm not going to end up the same way." A pause. Then Nico, softer now, more dangerous. "Your father died of a heart attack, cousin. Natural causes. Unless you think it was something else?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Clara pressed herself against the wall, her heart hammering. She shouldn't be hearing this. Whatever this was, business, family secrets, something darker, she shouldn't be here. "Get out," Lorenzo said finally, his voice lethal. "Get out of my house before I do something we'll both regret." Footsteps. Clara barely had time to slip into a doorway before Nico passed, his face twisted with anger. She waited until he was gone, counted to 30, then hurried back to her room. She didn't sleep at all that night. And in the morning, when she saw Lorenzo at breakfast, she understood something she hadn't before. He wasn't just cold. He wasn't just grieving. He was terrified. And somehow, without meaning to, Clara had walked into the middle of a war. The second week at the DeLuca estate brought an unseasonable cold snap that turned the rain to sleet and made the ocean beyond the gardens look like hammered steel. Clara woke each morning to find ice crystals on her window, delicate as lace, and she'd press her fingertips against the glass, watching them melt from her warmth. She was melting too, she realized. The careful distance she'd maintained, the professional boundary between caregiver and patient, between employee and employer, was dissolving little by little, day by day. Maria had stopped being Signora DeLuca and become something more. A grandmother figure, a friend, a woman whose loneliness echoed Clara's own in ways that made her chest ache. And Lorenzo was becoming a problem she didn't know how to solve. She'd catch him watching her sometimes when he thought she wasn't looking. During dinners when he actually joined them, his dark eyes would track her movements as she translated Maria's signs, and Clara couldn't read the expression on his face. Interest? Suspicion? Something more complicated that she didn't want to name? After overhearing the argument with Nico, Clara had done more research. Late at night, in her room with the door locked, she'd searched variations of DeLuca, import-export, New York, and criminal. The results had been vague but troubling. Old newspaper articles about federal investigations that went nowhere, mentions of the DeLuca name in connection with dock workers' unions and shipping companies, a case from 12 years ago that was dismissed on procedural grounds. Nothing concrete, nothing proven, but enough smoke to suggest fire. Clara knew she should leave, should take what she'd earned, thank Maria for the opportunity, and get as far away from this family as possible. But every time she thought about it, she'd remember Maria's face when they signed together, the way the elderly woman's loneliness lifted like fog in sunshine. She'd remember Lorenzo's expression when he'd knelt beside his mother's wheelchair, the vulnerability he'd allowed himself for just a moment. And she'd stay one more day, then another, then another. On Friday of the second week, Mrs. Romano approached Clara in the hallway outside Maria's room. The housekeeper's face was pinched with worry, her usual composure cracking around the edges. "Miss Bennet, I need to speak with you about tomorrow evening." "What's tomorrow evening?" "Mr. DeLuca is hosting a dinner. Business associates. It's important. He's requested that Signora Maria attend, and that you be present to assist her." Clara frowned. Maria usually has dinner in her room or the sunroom. She doesn't like crowds. "I know, but Mr. DeLuca was very specific. He wants his mother there and he wants you there to translate. The guests are high profile. This dinner is crucial to some negotiations Mr. DeLuca has been conducting. He's trying to—" Mrs. Romano paused, choosing her words carefully. "He's trying to change the direction of the family business. Not everyone is happy about it." "Nico?" Mrs. Romano's eyes sharpened. "You've observed more than I gave you credit for." "Yes, among others. Nico wants to expand certain operations. Lorenzo wants to pivot toward legitimate ventures. Real estate, tech investments, that sort of thing. Tomorrow's dinner is about securing allies for Lorenzo's vision. Your job is to keep Signora Maria comfortable and translate anything she says. Nothing more. Do you understand?" "I understand." But Mrs. Romano wasn't finished. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Miss Bennet, Clara, I've worked for this family for 23 years. I watched Lorenzo grow up. I loved his father like a brother. And I'm telling you now, be very, very careful tomorrow night. These people, they're not like us. They smile with their mouths and plot with their minds. Don't trust anyone except Signora Maria. Not even Lorenzo if you're smart." "You don't trust Lorenzo?" "I trust that he's trying to do the right thing. I don't trust that he'll be able to. There's a difference." Mrs. Romano straightened, her professional mask sliding back into place. "Dinner is at 7. Formal attire. I've laid out an appropriate dress in your room. And Clara, don't be late." The dress was navy blue, simple but elegant, with a modest neckline and hem that fell just below the knee. It fit perfectly, which meant someone had been paying attention to her size. The thought should have felt invasive, but Clara was getting used to the way this household operated. Nothing was left to chance. Everything was controlled. She spent the afternoon with Maria, who was unusually quiet. They sat in the library, the fire crackling in the hearth, and Maria knitted while Clara pretended to read. Finally, the elderly woman set down her needles and signed. "You're nervous about tonight." Clara lowered her book. "A little." Mrs. Romano said, "It's important. Everything is always important in this family. Important business, important meetings, important men making important decisions." Maria's signs were sharp with frustration. "You want to know what's really important? Kindness, laughter, love. But those things don't make money, so they don't matter. They matter to you. They used to matter to Lorenzo, too. When he was small, before his father started grooming him to take over the business, he was different, soft. He loved music, would sit at the piano for hours." Maria's hands moved with the memory, her expression distant. "Antonio, his father, he put a stop to that. Said the business needed Lorenzo to be strong, focused, hard. And Lorenzo, he tried so hard to be what his father wanted, even when it killed something inside him." Clara felt a pang of sympathy she didn't want to feel. "Does he still play? The piano?" "I don't know. I never hear him anymore. But sometimes, late at night, I see the light under the door of the music room, and in the morning the piano bench has been moved. So maybe, in secret, where no one can see him being soft." Before Clara could respond, the door opened and Antonio, the chef, poked his head in. "Signora Maria, I have the menu for tonight. Do you want to approve it?" Maria's face brightened. She loved working with Antonio on menus, loved feeling involved in the household even in small ways. As she wheeled herself over to discuss the dinner, Clara stayed by the fire thinking about a young Lorenzo sitting at a piano, playing music no one was allowed to hear. The dining room had been transformed. The table that usually stood bare and imposing now gleamed with crystal and silver, candles flickering in elaborate candelabras, flower arrangements strategically placed to create an atmosphere of refined elegance. It was beautiful and cold, like everything else in this house. Clara arrived at 6:30 as instructed, wearing the navy dress and the only pair of nice shoes she owned, black flats that were comfortable but not particularly stylish. Maria was already there, positioned at the table in her wheelchair, looking regal in a wine-colored dress with her silver hair swept up in an elegant chignon. She smiled when she saw Clara and signed, "You look beautiful. Like you belong here." "I don't belong here," Clara signed back honestly. "I'm just passing through. Maybe. Or maybe this is exactly where you're supposed to be." Before Clara could respond, Lorenzo entered, and Clara's breath caught despite herself. He wore a black tuxedo tailored to perfection, his dark hair swept back, his jaw clean-shaven. He looked like he'd stepped out of a fashion magazine, powerful, dangerous, untouchable. But when his eyes found Clara, something flickered across his face. Surprise, appreciation, interest. "Miss Bennett," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Thank you for being here tonight. My mother will be more comfortable with you present." "Of course." He moved to Maria, kissed her cheek, and signed slowly, clumsily but sincerely, "You look beautiful, Mama." Maria's face lit up. She reached up to cup his face, and for just a moment, they were just a mother and son. No business empire or family politics between them. Then the doorbell rang, and Lorenzo's expression shuddered. "They're here. Remember, both of you, tonight is about appearances. Smile, be gracious, and trust nothing you hear." The first guests to arrive were an older couple, Robert and Patricia Castellano. Robert was tall and silver-haired, with the kind of face that looked kind until you noticed the calculating coldness in his eyes. Patricia was elegant in diamonds and silk, her smile practiced and empty. "Lorenzo, my boy." Robert embraced Lorenzo like an old friend. "And Signora Maria, still beautiful as ever. You remember my wife, Patricia?" Maria nodded politely, and Clara stood quietly beside her, watching. Robert's eyes slid over Clara with mild interest. "And who's this lovely young woman?" "Clara Bennett," Lorenzo said before Clara could introduce herself. "My mother's companion and translator. Miss Bennett is fluent in ASL. How useful." Patricia's tone suggested it was anything but. "Does your mother require constant supervision, Lorenzo?" "I wasn't aware her condition had deteriorated." The insult was delicate but unmistakable. Maria's hands moved sharply. "Tell this woman that my mind is perfectly fine. It's my ears that don't work, not my brain." Clara translated word for word, and Patricia's smile froze. Lorenzo's lips twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. More guests arrived. A younger man named Marcus Saviano, who looked at Clara with undisguised interest, and at Lorenzo with barely concealed ambition. An older woman, Gabriella Costa, who kissed Maria on both cheeks and spoke rapid Italian that Clara couldn't understand, but Maria clearly could, judging by her delighted response. And finally, Nico, who sauntered in like he owned the place, his eyes finding Clara immediately and holding her gaze a beat too long. They moved to the dining room and Clara helped position Maria's wheelchair at the table. Lorenzo sat at the head, with Maria on his right and Robert Castellano on his left. Clara was seated beside Maria, close enough to translate but far enough to suggest she was staff, not guest. Nico ended up directly across from her, his smile predatory. The first course arrived, some kind of delicate soup that Clara didn't recognize, and conversation began. It started innocuously enough, talk of weather, holiday plans, charity galas, but Clara could feel the undercurrent, the real conversation happening beneath the polite words. "So, Lorenzo," Robert said, dabbing his mouth with a linen napkin, "I hear you're interested in divesting from some of the family's traditional holdings. I'm interested in diversification. The world is changing. We need to change with it. Change can be dangerous. Your father understood the value of maintaining established relationships. My father's been dead for 6 years." Lorenzo's voice was even, but Clara saw his knuckles whiten around his wine glass. "The landscape has shifted." "Has it? Or are you simply losing your nerve?" The table went silent. Even the staff serving seemed to freeze. Lorenzo smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I have plenty of nerve, Robert. What I've lost is patience for businesses that draw unwanted attention. Federal attention specifically." Robert's expression hardened. "Careful, boy. You're talking about legacy, about loyalty. I'm talking about survival." Maria's hands moved suddenly, sharply. Tell them what you really want to say, Lorenzo. Stop dancing around it." Clara hesitated, but Maria's expression was fierce. She translated, "Signora Maria says you should speak plainly, Lorenzo. Stop dancing around the real issue. All eyes turned to Maria, then to Lorenzo. He looked at his mother, something like gratitude flickering across his face. Then he set down his wine glass and leaned back in his chair. Fine. Plain speaking. The family business, the parts of it that involve moving goods across borders without proper documentation, the cash businesses that exist primarily for washing money, the relationships with people who solve problems with violence, all of it needs to end. Not gradually, not eventually. Now. The reaction was immediate. Marcus Saviano laughed nervously. Gabriella Costa gasped. Nico leaned forward with a dangerous smile, and Robert Castellanos' face turned to stone. You've lost your mind, Robert said quietly. Do you have any idea what you're proposing? How many people depend on those operations? How much money flows through them? I know exactly what I'm proposing. I'm proposing we become legitimate before the FBI makes us legitimate by putting us all in prison. The FBI has nothing on us, nothing they can prove. Yet. They have nothing yet. But they're patient, Robert. They're building cases, flipping low-level guys who'll testify against anyone to save their own skin. It's only a matter of time. Nico spoke up, his voice dripping with contempt. You're a coward, cousin. Your father would be ashamed. Lorenzo's jaw clenched, but before he could respond, Maria's hands flew into motion. Fast, angry, eloquent. Clara translated automatically. Signora Maria says, don't you dare invoke Antonio's name. My husband built this business from nothing, yes. But he also died at 59 from the stress of constantly looking over his shoulder. He died wondering if every chest pain was a heart attack or a bullet he didn't hear coming. He died afraid, and angry, and alone even when I was holding his hand. And Lorenzo was there. Lorenzo watched him die. So don't talk about shame when you weren't there to see what this life cost him. The silence that followed was absolute. Maria's face was wet with tears, her hands still trembling in her lap. Lorenzo looked stricken, his carefully maintained composure cracking, and Clara felt like she'd just witnessed something too private, too raw for this formal dining room with its candles and crystal. Robert Castellano stood slowly. This conversation is over. Lorenzo, when you've regained your senses, we'll talk. Until then, he nodded to his wife, and they headed for the door. Marcus and Gabriella followed quickly, murmuring apologies. Nico stayed. He looked at Lorenzo with something between pity and triumph. You just made powerful enemies, cousin. I hope your conscience keeps you warm when they come for you. Get out. With pleasure. But first, Nico's eyes slid to Clara. Miss Bennett, you should know. In this family, translators have a way of learning things they shouldn't, and people who know too much have a way of disappearing. Just friendly advice. That's enough. Lorenzo was on his feet, moving around the table with controlled fury. You threaten her again, family or not, and You'll what? Kill me? Nico laughed. You don't have the stomach for it anymore. That's your problem, Lorenzo. You've gone soft. He sauntered out, his laughter echoing down the hallway. The room was quiet except for Maria's silent crying. Lorenzo stood frozen, his hands clenched into fists. Clara didn't think. She just moved to Maria, kneeling beside her wheelchair and taking the elderly woman's hands. I'm sorry, Maria signed. I shouldn't have said those things. Not in front of guests. But I'm so tired, Clara. So tired of pretending this life is normal. That this family is normal. You have nothing to apologize for. You told the truth. That's not wrong. The truth is dangerous here. She's right, Lorenzo said quietly. He'd moved closer without Clara noticing. The truth is dangerous, and you... He looked at Clara, his expression unreadable. You just became a liability. Nico wasn't joking. The things you've heard tonight, the things you'll hear if you stay, they could put you in danger. Clara stood, meeting his gaze steadily. Then fire me. Send me away. But don't insult me by pretending this is about my safety. You need me here for Maria. And maybe... She paused, surprised by her own boldness. Maybe you need someone who isn't afraid to translate the truth even when it's uncomfortable. Something shifted in Lorenzo's expression. Surprise, respect, and something else that made Clara's pulse quicken. He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne. Something woody and expensive. You don't know what you're saying. This family, this business, it's not a game. People have died for knowing less than what you heard tonight. Then why did you say it? Why did you bring me here if you wanted to keep secrets? Because I thought... He ran a hand through his hair, disrupting its perfect styling. I thought if my mother was there, if you were there, they'd behave like civilized people. I thought wrong. Maria's hands moved. Take her somewhere safe. Talk to her properly. I'm tired. I want Antonio to take me to my room. As if summoned, the chef appeared in the doorway. He must have been listening, waiting for the chaos to settle. He moved to Maria's wheelchair with familiar ease. Come, Signora. Let's get you comfortable. I made your favorite tea. After they left, Clara and Lorenzo stood alone in the dining room. The candles had burned low, casting strange shadows across the wreckage of the dinner. Half-eaten food, abandoned wine glasses, the ghost of failed diplomacy. Walk with me, Lorenzo said finally. Please. He led her through the house, past the formal rooms and down a hallway Clara had never explored. They stopped at a door, and Lorenzo pulled out a key. No one comes in here. Not staff, not family. Just me. He opened the door to reveal a music room. A grand piano dominated the space, its black surface gleaming in the moonlight streaming through tall windows. Sheet music was scattered across the bench and floor. Chopin, Debussy, modern composers Clara didn't recognize. You play? Clara said softly. I used to. My father said it was a waste of time, that a man who plays piano is soft, weak, so I stopped. Publicly, Lorenzo moved to the piano, his fingers ghosting over the keys without pressing down. After he died, I came back to it, late at night when no one could hear, when I could pretend to be someone other than Antonio De Luca's son, the heir to an empire I never wanted. Why are you showing me this? He turned to face her, and in the moonlight he looked younger, more vulnerable. Because you're the first person in 6 years who's looked at my mother and seen a person instead of a liability. Because you translated her words tonight even knowing it would make things harder for me. Because you're not afraid of the truth, even when the truth is ugly. Clara's heart was hammering. Lorenzo, I'm not asking you to stay. I probably should send you away somewhere Nico and men like him can't find you, but... He paused, struggling with the words. I'm selfish. I want you to stay. My mother needs you. And He laughed. A sound without humor. I think I might need you too, even though I have no right to need anything from you. Clara should have run, should have packed her bags and been out the door before sunrise. Instead, she found herself moving closer to him, drawn by something she didn't understand and couldn't resist. Play something, she said. Please. Lorenzo studied her face for a long moment, then sat at the piano bench. His hands settled on the keys and he began to play, something slow and melancholic, full of longing and regret. Clara recognized it after a few measures. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, Opera 9, number 2. She watched his hands move across the keys, watched his face transform as the music poured out of him. All the emotion he kept locked away, finding voice through the instrument. When he finished, the silence felt sacred. That was beautiful, Clara whispered. My father hated it, said it was too emotional, too soft. Your father was wrong. Lorenzo looked up at her, and Clara saw the boy he'd been before the business and the violence and the weight of legacy had crushed him. Stay, he said. Please, Clara, stay. And even though her mind screamed warnings, even though she knew this family was dangerous and these secrets could destroy her, Clara heard herself say, Okay, I'll stay. She didn't see the man watching from the shadows in the hallway, didn't see Nico's smile as he pulled out his phone and dialed a number, but Lorenzo did. And as he walked Clara back to her room, he realized he'd just made a terrible mistake. By showing her his vulnerability, by asking her to stay, he'd painted a target on both their backs. The war he'd declared at dinner wasn't over. It had just begun. And Clara Bennett, the shy nanny who spoke in signs and wasn't afraid of truth, had just become the most dangerous piece on the board, and the one he'd do anything to protect. Clara couldn't sleep. She lay in her bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the evening over and over. Lorenzo's confession at the piano, Maria's tears, Nico's threat, and her own inexplicable decision to stay. The smart thing would be to leave at dawn, catch the first bus back to Boston, put as much distance as possible between herself and the De Luca family. But she'd given her word. And more than that, she'd seen something in Lorenzo's eyes when he played the piano, a glimpse of the person he'd been forced to bury, the softness his father had beaten out of him with expectations and violence. At 2 a.m. she gave up on sleep and pulled on her robe. The house was silent as she made her way downstairs, heading for the kitchen, and the chamomile tea Antonio kept stocked for Maria's insomnia. The hallways were dark except for emergency lighting, casting everything in shades of gray and shadow. She was halfway down the main staircase when she heard it. Voices, urgent and angry, coming from Lorenzo's study. Complete disaster. You alienated everyone at that table. Nico's voice sharp with fury. I told them the truth, something you've always had trouble with. Lorenzo sounded exhausted. The truth? The truth is that you're going to get us all killed or arrested. Robert Castellano doesn't forgive betrayal, cousin. And that's what tonight was. Betrayal. It was a choice. A choice my father never had the courage to make. A crash. Something thrown against a wall. Clara froze on the stairs. Don't you dare. Nico's voice had gone dangerous. Your father built this empire from nothing. He gave you everything. He gave me a prison. A life where I have to look over my shoulder every second, where I can't trust anyone, where people like you solve problems with threats and violence. I'm done, Nico. I'm done living his life. Silence. Then Nico, quieter now, more deadly. And the girl? The little translator? What's she to you? Leave Clara out of this. Can't do that, cousin. She heard too much tonight. She knows too much. That makes her a problem. Touch her and You'll what? You've already shown everyone you're too soft to do what needs to be done. That's why this family is falling apart. That's why... Clara didn't hear the rest. She backed up the stairs as quickly and quietly as possible, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her chest. Back in her room, she locked the door and leaned against it, trying to catch her breath. She was in danger. Real danger. And Lorenzo, for all his power and his promises, might not be able to protect her. Morning came gray and cold. Clara dressed mechanically, her body going through familiar motions while her mind raced. She needed to talk to someone, needed advice. But who? Mrs. Romano had warned her to trust no one. Antonio was loyal to the family. And Lorenzo was part of the problem, no matter how much she wanted to believe otherwise. She pulled out her phone and texted Michael. If something happened to me, if I disappeared, where would you look first? His response came immediately. WTF, Clara? Are you okay? What's going on? I'm fine, just, if something did happen, where would you start? I'd go to the last place your phone pinged. I'd check your bank records. I'd call the police. Clara, seriously, what is happening? Nothing. I'm just being paranoid. Love you. She turned on location sharing on her phone, made sure her emergency contacts were updated, and sent a long email to her personal account with everything she'd witnessed. The dinner conversation, Nico's threat, the overheard argument. If something happened to her, there would be a record. It felt melodramatic, it felt necessary. When she arrived at Maria's room, the elderly woman was already awake, sitting by the window in her wheelchair. Her face was drawn, tired, and when she saw Clara, her hands moved slowly. I didn't sleep. I keep thinking about last night, about what I said. You said what needed to be said, Clara signed back. Did I? Or did I just make everything worse? Maria's hands trembled. Lorenzo is trying so hard to change things to make this family legitimate. And I threw his father's death in everyone's face. I gave them ammunition to use against him. Clara knelt beside the wheelchair, taking Maria's hands in her own. You told the truth about what this life cost your family. That's not ammunition. That's testimony. And sometimes testimony is the most powerful weapon we have. You're wise for someone so young. I'm terrified for someone so young. But I'm still here. Maria cupped Clara's face, her eyes searching. Why? Why are you still here when you could leave? When you should leave? Clara thought about that question. Thought about her brother. About the bills she needed to pay. About the life she'd left behind in Boston. But none of those reasons felt true anymore. The truth was simpler and more complicated. Because you need me. Because Lorenzo needs someone who isn't afraid to translate the hard things. Because... Clara paused, surprised by what she was about to sign. Because I think I'm supposed to be here, even if I don't understand why yet. A knock at the door interrupted them. Mrs. Romano entered, her face grave. Miss Bennett? Mr. DeLuca would like to see you in his office. Immediately. Clara's stomach dropped. She looked at Maria, who signed quickly. Don't be afraid. My son won't hurt you. Whatever he wants, listen. Trust your instincts. Lorenzo's office was on the second floor, a room Clara had never entered. When Mrs. Romano opened the door, Clara found herself in a space that was surprisingly sparse. A large desk, bookshelves lined with legal texts and business journals, windows overlooking the ocean. No personal photographs, no artwork, nothing that revealed the man who worked here. Lorenzo stood at the window, his back to her. He wore dark slacks and a white shirt, no jacket, and Clara could see the tension in his shoulders. Close the door, he said without turning around. Mrs. Romano left, and Clara heard the soft click of the door shutting. She was alone with Lorenzo, and suddenly the room felt very small. "You heard us last night," Lorenzo said. It wasn't a question. "In the hallway, around 2 a.m., I saw your shadow on the stairs. There was no point in lying." "Yes. So you know. You know that Nico sees you as a threat, that Robert Castellano and his associates see you as a liability, that staying here puts you in danger." "I know." Finally, Lorenzo turned. His face was haggard, dark circles under his eyes suggesting he'd slept as poorly as Clara had. "Then why are you still here? Why didn't you run?" "Because I gave my word. And because," Clara took a breath, "because your mother needs me. And I think maybe you do too." Something flickered across Lorenzo's expression. Pain, longing, fear. He moved closer, close enough that Clara could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. "I can't protect you, Clara. Not from everyone. Not from all of them. Nico is unpredictable. Robert has resources I can't match. And there are others. People in the family business who see my attempt to go legitimate as betrayal. They'd hurt you to hurt me, to send a message, then send me away, fire me, tell your mother I quit. I can't do that either because—" He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration she was coming to recognize. "Because you're right. My mother needs you. For the first time in 6 years, she's happy. She talks, signs. She engages with the world. That's because of you. And I—" His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "I need you too, even though I shouldn't. Even though it's selfish and dangerous and wrong." Clara's heart was racing. She should step back, should maintain professional distance. Instead, she found herself asking, "Why do you need me?" Lorenzo's laugh was bitter. "Because you're not afraid of me. Everyone else in this house, they either fear me or they're plotting against me, but you look at me and see a person. Not a mafia prince, not a criminal, not a legacy. Just me. Do you have any idea how rare that is? I see a man trying to escape his father's shadow. I see someone who plays Chopin in secret because he's afraid to be soft in public. I see—" Clara paused, understanding something fundamental. "I see someone who's lonely, like me." The words hung in the air between them. Lorenzo took another step closer, and now there was barely any space between them. Clara could feel the heat radiating from his body, could see the way his chest rose and fell with each breath. "Clara," he said, her name rough in his throat. "If you stay, if you really stay, I can't promise you'll be safe, but I can promise I'll do everything in my power to keep you alive, even if it costs me everything." "Lorenzo." He cupped her face with both hands, his touch gentle despite the calluses on his palms. Don't say anything. Just let me have this moment. Let me pretend, just for a second, that I'm not who I am, that we're just two people who found each other, that there's no family business, no danger, no past that haunts every choice I make." Clara reached up and covered his hands with her own. They stood like that, frozen in a moment that felt stolen from some other life, some other world where a shy translator and a mafia heir could simply be two people who needed each other. Then Lorenzo's phone rang, sharp, insistent, shattering the moment. He pulled away, and Clara felt the loss like a physical ache. Lorenzo checked the screen, and his expression hardened. "I have to take this. It's Robert Castellano." He looked at Clara. "Stay in the house today. Don't go into the gardens, don't go anywhere alone. And Clara, thank you for staying, for not running, for—" He smiled, and it was sad and beautiful. "For seeing me." As Clara left his office, she heard him answer the phone, his voice cold and professional. "Robert, I wondered how long it would take you to call." She didn't hear the rest. She walked back to Maria's room in a daze, her mind spinning with everything that had just happened, everything that had almost happened. She was falling for Lorenzo De Luca. Despite the danger, despite the secrets, despite every logical reason to run, she was falling. And the terrifying thing was, she didn't want to stop. 3 days later, the house felt like it was holding its breath. Lorenzo had been gone since the morning after their conversation in his office. "Business in the city," Mrs. Romano had said tersely, but Clara saw the worry in her eyes. Nico had disappeared too, which should have felt like a relief but only amplified Clara's anxiety. Maria sensed the tension. She'd become quieter, her signs slower, more deliberate. They spent the days in careful routines, breakfast in the sunroom, reading in the library, early dinners where they pretended everything was normal. But at night, Clara would see Maria sitting by her window, staring out at the dark ocean, and she knew the elderly woman was afraid for her son. On the third evening, Clara was helping Maria prepare for bed when she noticed something strange. Maria kept glancing at the door, her hands moving restlessly in her lap. Finally, she signed, "I need to tell you something. Something Lorenzo doesn't know I know." Clara sat on the edge of the bed, her full attention on Maria. "What is it?" "Antonio, my husband. He kept journals. Everything that happened in the business, he wrote it down. Names, dates, transactions. He said if anything ever happened to him, if the family needed leverage or protection, those journals would be their insurance." Clara's breath caught. "Where are they?" "Lorenzo thinks they burned in the fire 6 years ago. The fire that destroyed Antonio's office the same week he died. But I saved them. I knew someone might try to destroy them, so the night Antonio died, while Lorenzo was at the hospital, I took them, hid them." Maria's hands were shaking now. I think Nico knows. Or suspects. I think that's why he's been watching me. Watching you. He wants those journals. Maria, this is huge. You need to tell Lorenzo." "I will. But first, I need you to do something for me." Maria reached into her nightstand and pulled out a key. "Tomorrow morning early, before anyone else is awake, go to the pool house. There's a loose stone in the fireplace, third from the left on the bottom row. Behind it is a safe. The combination is 04-1786, Lorenzo's birthday. Inside are the journals. Take them. Hide them somewhere Nico would never think to look." And then, a sound in the hallway made them both freeze. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Maria quickly shoved the key into Clara's hand and signed frantically, "Go. Out the back door. Now." Clara moved quickly to the door that led to Maria's private bathroom and the servants' corridor beyond. She slipped through just as the main door opened. Through the crack, she saw Nico enter, his smile cold. "Aunt Maria," he said loudly, as if volume could penetrate deafness. "We need to talk about those journals." Clara's heart stopped. She wanted to stay, to protect Maria, but the elderly woman had turned her back to Nico, signing something Clara couldn't see. "Trust me," that gesture said. "Go." Clara ran. She made it to her room, locked the door, and immediately called Lorenzo. It went to voicemail. She tried again, and again. Nothing. Then her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Looking for Lorenzo. He's busy. Having a conversation with some federal friends." Funny how anonymous tips work. And Clara's blood ran cold. Nico had set Lorenzo up, and now he was in Maria's room, pressuring her for the journals, and Clara had no way to protect her or warn Lorenzo. She did the only thing she could think of. She called 911. 911, what's your emergency? "I'm at the DeLuca estate in the Hamptons. There's a woman here, elderly, disabled, and a man is threatening her. She's deaf, she can't call for help. Ma'am, we need you to stay calm." "What's the address?" Clara gave it, her voice shaking. "Please hurry, he's dangerous. The family they're involved in criminal activity. The woman, Maria DeLuca, she has evidence, journals, and her nephew Nico is trying to—" The line went dead. Clara stared at her phone in horror. No signal. Nico must have killed the cell tower or used a jammer. She was alone. No, not alone. She had Maria's key. She had a choice. She could run, could take the servants' entrance and disappear into the night, or she could do what Maria had asked. Get the journals. Save them. Maybe save them all. Clara chose. The pool house was dark, the water in the indoor pool reflecting moonlight in rippling patterns. Clara's hands shook as she worked the stone loose from the fireplace, and when it finally gave way, she found the safe exactly where Maria had said. For 1786, the combination clicked and the door swung open. Inside were 5 leather-bound journals, their pages dense with Antonio DeLuca's precise handwriting. Clara grabbed them, shoved them into her bag, and turned to leave, and found Nico blocking the doorway. "Clever girl," he said softly. "I knew Aunt Maria would send you. She always did have a soft spot for strays." He stepped inside, and Clara backed up until she hit the edge of the pool. "Give me the journals, Clara. This doesn't have to end badly for you. Where's Maria? If you hurt her—" "She's fine, sleeping. I gave her something to help her rest. Very peaceful." Nico's smile was terrifying. Last chance. The journals. Clara's mind raced. The pool behind her. The journals in her bag. Nico between her and the only exit. "No," she said. Nico moved fast, grabbing for her, but Clara was faster. She threw herself backward into the pool, bag and all, and dove deep. The water was freezing, shocking her system, but she kicked hard, swimming underwater toward the far end. Behind her, she heard the splash of Nico diving in after her. She surfaced, gasped for air, and saw the main house, saw lights flicking on, saw Mrs. Romano's face appear in a window, saw, incredibly, police cars pulling up the driveway, their lights painting everything in red and blue. Her 911 call had gone through. They'd come. Nico grabbed her ankle, dragged her under. Clara kicked, connected with something soft, heard his muffled curse. She surfaced again, screaming, "Help! He's trying to kill me!" And then strong hands were pulling her out of the pool, police officers swarming, and Nico was being dragged out in handcuffs, still cursing. Clara collapsed on the tile, coughing up pool water, clutching her bag with the journals. Miss, are you okay?" A female officer was kneeling beside her. "We got a call about a threat at this address. Are you hurt?" "Maria, Mrs. DeLuca. He gave her something. Drugged her. Please check on her." The officer radioed for an ambulance while another officer helped Clara to her feet. She was shaking, freezing, but alive, and then Lorenzo was there, bursting through the pool house door, his face white with terror. "Clara! Oh God, Clara!" He pulled her against him, and she felt him trembling. "When they told me what happened, when I saw the police cars, I thought, I'm okay," Clara managed through chattering teeth. "The journals. I have them. They're safe." Lorenzo pulled back, looked at her like she was insane. "The journals? I don't care about the journals. I thought I'd lost you. I thought—" He pulled her close again, pressing his face into her wet hair. "Don't ever scare me like that again. Don't ever—" "Your mother," Clara interrupted. "Nico drugged her. We need to—" They ran together toward the main house. 6 months later, the classroom at Manhattan Community College was bright with afternoon sun, filled with students practicing their finger spelling. Clara moved between them, correcting hand shapes, offering encouragement, feeling more at home than she'd ever felt at the DeLuca estate. Teaching ASL had always been her dream. Now, with the reward money from helping the FBI dismantle the DeLuca family's criminal operations, and Lorenzo's insistence on paying her far more than their agreement, she'd been able to make that dream real. Michael was thriving at Columbia, his tuition paid in full. Maria had recovered from Nico's sedation and now lived in a beautiful brownstone in the village, close enough that Clara could visit weekly. The elderly woman had a full-time companion, someone who signed fluently and made her laugh, and she was improbably happy. As for Lorenzo, Clara had heard he'd cooperated fully with the FBI, turning state's evidence against everyone involved in the family business. He'd served 6 months in minimum security, and when he got out, he'd started over. New name, new life, away from everything DeLuca. Clara hadn't seen him since the night of the pool. He'd made sure she was safe, had stayed at the hospital while Maria was examined, and then he'd disappeared into FBI custody. No goodbye, no explanation, just gone. She told herself it was better this way, cleaner. They came from different worlds, had collided in crisis, and now they were both free to build new lives. She believed that right up until she dismissed her last class of the day and looked up to find Lorenzo standing in her doorway. He looked different, thinner, his hair shorter, wearing jeans and a simple blue sweater instead of his usual expensive suits. But his eyes were the same, dark and intense and fixed on her like she was the only thing in the world worth seeing. "Hi," he said. Clara's heart was thundering. "Hi. He stopped, started again. "I've been learning. ASL. It's slow going, but I wanted to. I needed to." He raised his hands and signed, slowly but correctly. "I'm sorry I left. I'm sorry I didn't say goodbye. I was afraid if I saw you again I wouldn't be able to do what I needed to do." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "You did the right thing. You saved yourself, saved your mother, you saved us. You saved all of us." Lorenzo stepped into the classroom, moving closer. "I'm not who I was, Clara. I'm not Lorenzo DeLuca anymore. I changed my name, changed my life. I work in tech now, legitimate, boring tech. I have an apartment in Brooklyn. I take the subway. I'm normal, or trying to be. What do you want?" Clara signed, because she needed to know, needed to hear him say it. Lorenzo took her hands, and Clara felt that same electric connection she'd felt in his music room all those months ago. "I want to take you to coffee," he said out loud. "I want to learn the rest of your signs. I want to meet your brother. He signed again, carefully. "I want a chance, a real chance. No secrets, no danger, just us." Clara looked at this man who'd been willing to destroy everything he knew to build something better, who'd learned her language because it mattered to her, who'd walked away to keep her safe and come back when he could offer her something real. She signed her answer. Just us sounds perfect. When he kissed her, gentle and reverent like she was something precious he'd thought he'd lost. Clara tasted salt and hope and new beginnings. Outside the classroom window, the city stretched endlessly, full of possibilities and second chances. And for the first time in her life, Clara wasn't afraid of what came next. She was ready.